I never thought a simple rainstorm would turn my quiet Eastgate Townhomes life into a tense countdown. The sound of raindrops drumming on my roof was calming. Yet by the next morning, it became the signal for the start of a meticulous inspection I hadn't asked for. A security guard contracted by the HOA had started measuring every barrel, calculating distances down to the inch, apparently convinced that my rainwater collection was breaching some invisible limit. Within the first hour, I realized this wasn't a casual check. It was a ticking clock, a 48-hour tally that would decide whether I face a formal warning or a fine. By mid-morning, I had grabbed my camera and notebook, determined to document every step of the guard's measurements. My mind raced. Could a single guard, armed with a tape measure and a clipboard, really force me into compliance over something so trivial? Yet the HOA's notice referenced Bylaw 6.1, clearly stating collection limits for water barrels. This was no misunderstanding. It was the start of a very specific power play. The sense of urgency pulsed through me. I scanned the backyard, counting 3 barrels placed near the garage wall and 1 by the fence, all carefully spaced to catch runoff efficiently. The guard paced between them, pen scribbling furiously, eyes narrowing as if detecting violations invisible to the casual observer. I could hear his shoes crunch on the wet gravel as he crouched, measuring the gap between each barrel and the wall. My stomach tightened. The stakes were a $250 notice and potential ongoing harassment if I failed to satisfy the board. It was at this moment I realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing a rule. They were escalating a petty war over inches. Every barrel, every space, every drip of water became evidence in an unseen trial. My instincts screamed that I needed a strategy beyond passive compliance. I would need photos, timestamps, and detailed measurements to prove my case, perhaps even turn their obsession into leverage. The scene felt absurdly tense, the kind of petty battle that seemed tailored for a slow-burning revenge story. By mid-afternoon, I had taken photos of every barrel from multiple angles, annotating the distances with notes on the sidewalk chalk lines I had drawn for reference. I checked the official HOA bylaws again, confirming the limit stated in Section 6.1. Each measurement I took was precise, designed to anticipate the guard's next complaint and neutralize it before it became a formal notice. A creeping awareness settled in. This wasn't about water collection at all. It was about control. The association wanted to assert dominance, and I would need to match them inch for inch. I remember my neighbor across the cul-de-sac, Mrs. L., whose mailbox had recently sparked drama over a single tilt of its post. Her tale had ended in public embarrassment and a $350 fine. I couldn't let that happen to me. I couldn't allow a $250 notice to escalate into something worse. With my camera and notes ready, I watched the guard, sensing his meticulous steps, counting his pauses. Each of them became an opportunity to document, an opportunity to fight back subtly, to set the stage for a clever maneuver later. The sun peeked through the clouds, creating a brief glare over the barrels, and I realized the angle could help me in documenting spacing discrepancies. By this point, I had started labeling each barrel A through D, and I began measuring from reference points specified in the bylaw: the fence, the garage wall, and the property line. Every measurement was logged with care. It was slow, tedious work, but I could see the satisfaction of anticipation building, a sense that if I played my cards right, I could transform this petty obsession into a lesson in meticulous compliance. I paused for a moment, reflecting on the absurdity. The HOA had a guard spending hours measuring barrels, while neighbors complained about stray leaves and parking violations. Yet here I was, documenting inch-perfect placements, mentally preparing for the inevitable escalation. Something about this scenario felt cinematic, the kind of HOA nightmare that lured viewers into every petty dispute. I smiled wryly, realizing potential for a subtle, satisfying counterstrike once the guard filed his report. The HOA's background at Eastgate Townhomes was well known among residents, a board dominated by perfectionists, with a few outspoken members who thrived on minor infractions. Karen, one of the board's most feared enforcers, had a particular reputation for scrutinizing small deviations and escalating them into formal violations. I didn't know if she had initiated this inspection personally, but her influence was everywhere, from the language and notices to the guard's precise measurements. My mailbox style, a slight, tilt of my driveway pavers. Even minor flowerbed arrangements had previously drawn sharp letters. Everything seemed connected in a web of micro-surveillance that turned neighborly life into a tactical game. The rain barrels were a new frontier, and the guard's obsession hinted at a board member's desire to set an example. The HOA's communication had been formal but loaded with judgment. Ensure compliance with Section 6.1 and avoid potential penalties. Even reading it felt invasive, the way rules intruded into the details of daily life. I could feel a mixture of irritation and curiosity building. How far would they push? How petty would they become? And most importantly, how could I turn this intrusion into leverage rather than capitulation? I took a slow lap around my backyard, clipboard in hand, tallying the exact distances. Water sloshed lightly in one of the barrels, echoing the faint drips from the downspouts, a rhythmic reminder of both nature's persistence and the guard's obsession. Every calculation was a mental chess move. If the guard noted a minor discrepancy, I needed preemptive evidence to counter it. It was tedious, but each entry increased my confidence. I began imagining a layout map, a document that combined photos, distances, and timestamps, ready to show to the board if needed. The guard's presence was constant, a shadow across my yard. He crouched, adjusted his clipboard, and paced in the wet grass, as if every inch of my property were a battlefield. The meticulousness felt almost performative, designed to assert authority rather than correct a true violation. I realized quickly that documentation was my only shield. By mid-evening, I had created a full record placement and spacing, complete with notes referencing Bylaw 6.1. This archive would become my weapon should the $250 notice escalate into formal fines or social shaming by the board. Could a simple documentation effort turn the board's obsession into leverage before the 48-hour inspection closes? I knew the clock was ticking. If I didn't anticipate every possible complaint, Karen or another board member could seize the opportunity to escalate quickly, turning minor deviations into a costly headache. My plan needed precision, creativity, and a sense of irony, turning their obsession with inches into proof of compliance that could outmaneuver them. By late evening, the guard finally paused to review his notes, marking what he considered significant. I stepped back, camera ready, knowing that every movement was evidence in this peculiar HOA war. The backyard was silent, except for the occasional drip from the gutters, but tension filled the space. I began arranging barrels slightly to test the boundaries of the bylaw, ensuring that even a minor complaint could be countered with preemptive documentation. My strategy was unfolding. Patience, meticulous recording, and subtle adjustments. The first few hours of what should have been a routine check had revealed an unexpected reality. The HOA's obsession with trivial details could be manipulated. Every inch measured, every notation recorded, became part of a quiet, mounting rebellion. If I could maintain control of the narrative through precise documentation, the board's own rules could become the instrument of a carefully executed countermove. I took a deep breath, feeling both the absurdity and the potential satisfaction of this tiny, escalating drama. The day ended with the guard marking his final notes, still scrutinizing the layout with the seriousness of a surveyor on a critical site. I felt the electric tension of the HOA's rules, the latent threat of fines, and the opportunity simmering just beneath the surface. The stage was set. I had photos, measurements, and a clear understanding of the bylaw. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the first glimmers of satisfying resolution began to form. The next morning, the tension had not eased. I reviewed my notes and photos from yesterday, arranging them into a simple spreadsheet with labels and timestamps. Each barrel was cataloged, distances from walls and fences cross-checked, and every potential violation preemptively flagged with a brief note. The guard returned promptly, clipboard in hand, pacing with the same rigid precision. I noticed he spent extra time measuring barrel D near the fence corner, where I had carefully maintained a slight buffer. This observation confirmed my suspicion. The HOA's fixations were selective, focusing on areas that could be framed as deliberate violations. I spent the next hour quietly recording each measurement he took, taking extra care to angle the camera so the tape measure was clearly visible in each photo. Rain had left shallow puddles reflecting the morning light, creating a surreal backdrop for this ongoing inspection. Each puddle mirrored the barrels in the guard's shadow as he crouched to adjust his tape. It felt absurd, almost cinematic, like a slow-motion reenactment of an HOA nightmare. Yet, every inch of footage and annotation I captured was strengthening my position. The $250 notice now felt like leverage if I played this correctly, instead of simply a threat. By mid-morning, I realized the guard was moving slower than before, documenting each inch with an almost ritualistic devotion. I checked the bylaw again. Section 6.1 clearly limited the number of barrels and the maximum distance from walls, but offered enough ambiguity for interpretation. I began calculating how a minor adjustment in placement could technically bring me into compliance while still subtly define the intended control. This delicate dance between obedience and strategy became my primary focus. Hours passed with me tracking measurements and maintaining an almost obsessive log of the guard's movements. I began noticing patterns. He would pause at particular angles, as if seeking justification for a potential violation, and occasionally glance toward the street where neighbors were beginning to notice the unusual inspection. Rumors of past fines circulated through whispered conversations across the cul-de-sac, fueling my anxiety and sense of urgency. Could a $250 notice escalate into a more severe financial penalty? I reminded myself that documentation was my shield, my armor against the arbitrary enforcement of the HOA's obsessive rules. I decided to test boundaries gently. I shifted barrel seat a mere 2 inches farther from the garage wall, ensuring it remained within bylaw limits, but still appearing to breach them at a casual glance. The guard crouched, measured, frowned, and jotted a note, his brow furrowed as if he detected something amiss. I captured it all on camera, timestamps included. This small act felt almost like a psychological chess move, nudging the inspection toward evidence I could later use. The tension of the moment was palpable. Each step carried the weight of potential escalation. Could my subtle adjustments provoke a misstep that turns the HOA's obsession against itself? I sensed the tipping point approaching. The guard's rigid adherence to measurement offered an opportunity. If I could document inconsistencies or interpretive leeway, I could force the board to acknowledge the limitations of their own rules. Every inch mattered, and every click of my camera became a potential weapon in this slow-burning confrontation. The afternoon brought new complications. Mrs. L from 2 houses down watched from her porch, muttering about past fines and board preferences. Her scrutiny reminded me that public perception was a factor. The HOA thrived on social pressure, and every misstep could be weaponized. I made sure each photo captured context, fence lines, pavement edges, and even her porch for reference. The documentation became increasingly thorough, a complete record of compliance that could counter any claim of negligence. Escalation was inevitable. By mid-afternoon, I received a brief digital notice from the HOA. Ensure all barrels are in compliance. Repeated infractions may incur additional penalties. The $250 notice now loomed like a first wave, and I realized the board intended to maintain constant pressure until I yielded or made a mistake. I reviewed the bylaw and my notes carefully, identifying 2 ambiguous areas that could serve as leverage. By recording the guard's actions against the exact language of Section 6.1, I was preparing evidence that framed my compliance in precise, indisputable terms. The guard continued meticulously, pacing the yard, measuring from the fence, crouching, remeasuring, and occasionally gesturing toward the property line. Rain had returned in a drizzle, making the ground slick and adding a sensory weight to each movement. The smell of wet earth, the sound of droplets on barrels. My tension built, but so did my determination. I began drafting a formal layout map, layering photographs with handwritten notes and bylaw references. This was becoming a full-scale record, a quiet retaliation in progress. Could I use this documentation to shift the power dynamic before the board escalates further? I knew the guard's measurements, combined with clear photographic evidence, could highlight the arbitrary enforcement of minor rules. If done correctly, the HOA's obsession could backfire, transforming what seemed like punishment into leverage for a careful, strategic response. My mind raced with scenarios, plotting a patient, meticulous counterstrike. By late afternoon, I had completed the first draft of my evidence packet. Each barrel's placement, distances, and bylaw references were clearly mapped, creating a compelling case that aligned perfectly with official guidelines. Even the guard seemed oblivious to the subtle power shift occurring under his watchful gaze. I felt a mixture of anticipation and satisfaction. This petty drama was turning into an HOA revenge story I could narrate with pride. In the last several hours, I meticulously documented every barrel, measured each distance, and captured photographic evidence against Section 6.1. The guard's obsessive inspection, paired with my careful records, set the stage for a strategic countermove using the $250 notice as leverage. As evening approached, I felt a subtle thrill of control. The guard completed his rounds, marking notes and pausing at key points, yet my record was comprehensive. I reviewed each photograph and note, ensuring that every potential complaint had an airtight counterpoint. My plan to subtly manipulate